يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني عربية قلبي.
The feminists rallying the firefighting professionals and saying that we don't want this. What's happened is that they've had to, the course that they would have to do, the physical course, that would have taken, let's say, 10 minutes. They've had to add, let's say, a minute to it. Why? So that they can be more inclusive of women. Now the question is, if there is a burning building, who would you want to save you? A woman that could come 30 seconds later, or a man that will come 30 seconds earlier will save your life? I believe you, the biggest feminist in the building would want a man to come, even if it means admission that in this situation we don't want equality of opportunity or outcome. So this is just one specialized example. I'm not saying society is filled with those examples, but this is an exacerbated example of a situation where it's very clear that men have an advantage over women, and a non-recognition of this is tantamount to life and death. So this is where feminism can lead to death. Now, the point I'm making to you is, we have to look, because you're a man of science and you talk about empiricism and rationalism and these things. If we look holistically, and once again, what is the most effective and efficient thing for an economy, we have to take into consideration those factors. Once again, feminists, and this is the argument of Warren Farron, he says that they don't take into consideration the fact that men have been conscripted into the armies for maybe 10 for the whole of American history. There's been male conscription, there has never been female conscription. If we want to equalize the historical problem of patriarchal society, what we're going to need to do is conscribe women to an army for the same amount of times that we've conscribed men to the army. So if we want equality, now we have to get women drafted, forced into being in an army, drafted and forced into being in an army the same amount of times that men had been in the past. But this argument, this is why it's a fallacious argument, and it's premised on a false premise. And the premise is, despite the despite the natural differences, we should have the equality on every level. And I'm saying to you, that doesn't make any sense. If we accept the premise that identical things should be treated equally, and we identify that women are not identical to men, then there must be a space, at least in some instances, where women will be treated differently to men. That's why we have maternity leave. That's why we have so many things society has put in place for women. That's why in emergencies, women and children are taken out first before men, because it's assumed men are more physically self-sufficient, and rightfully, in my opinion, assumed that men are more physically self-sufficient than women. That's why men have been drafted into the armies, and that's why women have been able to enjoy the privilege of being protected by male military men for almost all of civilization cross-culturally. Of course. So we can't have our cake and eat it both. We can't say we want equality of outcome and opportunity, but at the same time have these exceptions which feminists put in place, you see, which of course entitle them to things which are otherwise not.
Then this is what I'm trying to say. Your argument is reductionist. And when I say reductionist, I say that I understand, but I say it in the sweetest sense, right? I understand you come from a standpoint where there's a lot of colonial imperialist science that has been enforced on the Middle East as if it's the highest standard. I'm coming to say that, in particular, that's not the case. We can work together, kind of thing. Because I feel like there's a lot of conservative values that the Middle East and certain Arab countries have that the West has lost. Now, that would be a nice middle to come into, discussing those differences, and we can meet in the middle of that. But the only problem I have to say is that when it comes to talking to Muslims in particular, that it becomes a very reductionist argument, in the sense that, like you say, there's a difference between men and women. I'll ask you a simple question. Can you name me a white sprinter faster than any black female sprinter? And that's why I say to you that I've always made the argument, I've made this on camera as well, that actually this is the fallacy of the West. Because if you look at the sprinters, and for example, black sprinters, they have consistently outperformed white sprinters for the last 100 years. But now, why is that?
Because they're not equal.
No, but this is what I'm trying to know.
Black sprinters and white sprinters are not equal.
Well, you got to be fair. They're not. No, I understand.
Black
why
sprinters
is
are faster.
that? But we know why
genetically.
that is. We know why that is.
Genetics.
You can't just say genetically, though.
Yes,
why is that?
Sometimes
what is passed on in their genetics that makes them faster?
Well, lots of things. That's why the same thing applies now when you talk about black swimmers versus white swimmers.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing is, you have to understand. Look at Eastern Europe. Sorry, but look at Eastern Africa.
I'm just saying, you got to be fair and you got to build a bridge with me, right?
Yeah.
You got to build a bridge. You got to allow me to
I agree with
come
your
into the
point.
middle. What I'm trying to say in particular is that you see where we get into a reductionist argument. The reason in particular there's more faster black female sprinters than there are white male sprinters, which should be a contradiction to this whole thing.
I don't know about that. I don't think that's correct.
Can you name one?
No. The male sprinters are faster than black female swimmers.
Can you name a black swimmer? Black male swimmer that is faster than a female swimmer. So what I'm trying to say is there are certain environmental factors and certain cultural differences that over time have bred certain differences.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with man or woman or whatever. That has more to do.
But it has everything to do with it.
But it has everything to do with the environment. It has everything to do with culture. It has everything to do with nurturing.
Okay.
There's so much to this argument that we need to take into consideration. So what I'm trying to say in particular, when we talk about men and women and their equal rights, right? Yeah. We're trying to say an equal right of opportunity because we've seen that there's different factors.
What about in the firefighter?
Wait. I'll get onto that. We've seen that when given different environments and different selection pressures, human beings, whether you're man or woman, come out completely different people.
I know
they come out completely different. We need to remember when we talk about all of these things, we need to take all of these things into consideration.
But you know what you've just applied?
And it's very similar. Give me 2 seconds. Yeah. It's very similar to the whole kind of like debate that we have in America about black privilege, white privilege, and whatever, so on. So, no one takes into consideration the historical benefits that white people got. That black people didn't, allowing them to start their race a lot sooner than black people. But now people complain as to why we're so behind. What I'm trying to say is people don't realize the historical effect of that. And what I'm trying to say in particular is that when we come to build bridges, when I've talked to people in this park about white privilege, right, you will get the most polarized righty. But I can build a bridge with him, explain the history.
We're building bridges. I think we agree.
Explain the context, explain the history. And that allowed me to get on his side, understand where he's coming from, because I know exactly where they're coming from. And he's allowed to see my side and realize, you know what, there is a quantifiable reason for reparations for these people. And we haven't done enough. We've been a bit complicit and so on and so. So what I'm trying to say is when we're talking about, say, any kind of deliberation in Islam, that's what I want. I want that bridge where you don't feel like we're attacking or anything like that.
For sure. I think this is fruitful. I want to say two things though.
Go on.
There's two things. You said that the argument is reductionist. And then you said that, you know, there's a lot of factors that come into it. Now,
let's not get too heated about buzzwords.
No. I'm just trying to smooth out potential inconsistency. All I'm saying is this. First and foremost, what you seem to have applied is genetic fallacy. Just because something has come from a certain place,
of course,
it doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Of course,
So the fact that, for example, men have been advantaged, if we take that premise true, and it is true in some context.
But it's not something they controlled.
So the fact that that is the case doesn't change the reality, the sociological reality of how to deal. That's one thing. So number two is just because something is reductionist, it doesn't mean it's wrong. So for example, if I say 2 + 2 = 4, that's reductionist in a sense. It's mathematically reductionist because I'm taking. Or look at, for example.
Not necessarily, because 2 + 2 = 4 is the highest you can go in that paragraph.
Let's say if we're looking at a fraction, if I say.
If you were to look at me and say my skin is black, that would be a reductionist argument.
Okay, if I say 15 out of 60 equals 1 out of 4, I might be wrong here.
Don't worry. I understand. Go. I'm not gonna.
All right. So here I'm reducing 15 out of 60 to 1 out of 4. Now it's reductionist, but it doesn't mean it's wrong.
No, I understand that. I understand.
It's a good starting point academically to say something is reductionist. But then you have to explain why it's wrong.
But you would never make laws. You would never do any application of anything on a reductionist argument. There is always an elaboration.
In fact, the opposite is true. Because let me tell you why the opposite is true.
Go on.
Occam's razor, which is in fact is a premise, you could say a principle which is applied both in physics and philosophy. Is exactly trying to reduce something to the lowest common particular multiple. So if I say, for example, the reason that the pyramids were built, or the reason why, X is Y. The reason why X is Y. I'm not going to give any examples because I know every single example I give.
No, I've got an answer to this,
That's a reductionist thing. Now, if you say the only reason, that's different. If I say the main reason, so it depends on extent. Now, whatever the reason is, the point I'm making is that when it comes to men and women, the argument of the feminists, which, by the way, minority of women, like 7% of women in the UK identify with
this is why it's
feminism.
hard for me to see why you're conflating such radical arguments with actually neutral, kind of like trying to build bridge arguments. We'll get onto that, but let me not derail. Let me not derail your point. Let me not derail your point. Sorry, Gary.
So I was just going to say that, look, when we're talking about different kind of subsections of society, whether it be men, women, blacks, whites, or religious groups, I'm totally for the idea of building bridges. But doing so whilst keeping, for example, one's cultural heritage intact.
I think you can still do.
That's what I advocate. So I say, for example, going to exactly the crux of what you want me to talk about. I say that I'm a Muslim, right?
Of course.
There are certain things which I believe are non-negotiables in terms of my, if you like, aqidah, creed. I will never change the fact that I hope to never change the fact that I believe in one God.
Of course.
I hope to never change the fact that I believe in the Prophet Muhammad, and I hope to never change the fact that all the injunctions, including the woman's hijab or the fact that a man can wear whatever, all of these things, I accept them wholesale.
Yeah, of course.
Now, whether or not political philosophies, ideologies, etc., have contradictory outlooks on these particular premises or these particular injunctions or whatever prescriptions, for me is irrelevant. But what I would say is this, is that within Islam, and it's the same thing as I said to the guy last week, within Islam is an inbuilt flexibility which allows us to coexist. So whereas we would not agree with someone, the Quran says, "Lakum dinukum waliya din." You have your religion and I have my religion. So whereas we might not agree with these things, with X, Y, Z,
that's good, yeah.
we still can agree to disagree.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's the point, really.
No, and I absolutely believe in the freedom to believe without persecution. That's my main thing, and this is why I'm defending mostly about the grooming gangs and whatever. But I have to draw a parallel here, because when you talk about, you know, we can reduce arguments to certain things and we can like go on from there, you need to understand that these are the same arguments, right, that certain idiots like Tommy Robson and all his crew use to justify their vilification of anyone else.
But you know,
when we talk about the articles, one of the biggest things that I hate about the articles is that it paints people as Muslim, right? There is nowhere in the police reports that anyone has been identified as Muslim. They don't collect that information. So where they got that from, I don't know. But for them, it's a reductionist argument to think that because someone is from Pakistan and Bangladesh, automatically they're Muslim. Reductionist argument, demonizing a whole nation that doesn't necessarily need to be demonized. Now, what I'm trying to say is when we reduce arguments and we don't allow deliberation, this is what happens.
If what you're saying is that we need to look at the nuances.
Exactly.
So I would agree with that.
No, but what I want in particular is I want to talk about a nuance within like the Islamic community. Because I feel like that would be something that would be, one, greatly appreciated by people in particular in the West, but also in particular, I think it would give less reason.
What's happening?
I don't know.
I think we're going to have a discussion today.
Yeah. It would give less reason for radicals like that to be able to reduce your religion and your culture and your people to one single factor that they deem is suitable for them. So what I'm trying to say is I want to build a nuance between just the Western civilization or society, whatever you want to call it, and Islam. Because right now, there's so many Middle Eastern countries that are becoming superpowers. They're going from LEDCs to MEDCs, but they're also experiencing cultural shifts as they do that. Because when you're an LEDC, you tend to stick to more traditional, fundamental religious practices, right? Especially when it comes to the whole...
I think you could be conflating two things here, which is correlation versus causation.
But you did this as well with pornography. That's another thing. When we were talking about pornography, you were talking about the idea that pornography supposedly shrinks your brain size and so and so. That's not the case. Addiction shrinks your brain size. I don't
think I ever said that it shrinks.
It was in the video. It was in the video.
Say shrink?
Yeah. No, not shrinks, but like decreases the brain activity, brain size, basically.
What I think I said.
Yeah.
And I remember,
what I said is that. Correct me, man. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
There's two parts of the brain.
Yeah.
There's what is referred to as the reptilian core. And there's another place called the nucleus accumbens.
RNK selected.
Now, the nucleus accumbens, the reptilian core, where things like dopamine and oxytocin are secreted. When, for example, someone is stimulated, they secrete those things. Yeah. Now, for example, if someone is addicted to pornography, they continually secrete dopamine, oxytocin. Now, what that does is it creates something called a withdrawal effect, which activates a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens.
I'm just going to stop you for just a quick kind of overview kind of thing. You're describing addiction. I did psychology A levels, so I know what addiction is. And exactly. So you know observation is key. But that is what you're describing. You're describing addiction. We know in psychology that there's various mediums for addiction, and pornography is a medium for addiction. But you have to have an addictive personality to be addicted to porn in the first place. There are very many, and most of them are nuanced porn users. They go, they watch porn, and they won't watch it for maybe a week or two or a month. That's the majority of porn.
Justify the thing.
Well, let me. we can get into that. We can get into that.
Because I don't know why you would justify such a thing. You got all these feminists. I mean, do you know?
But this is the thing. I think this is the problem.
Let me tell you something really interesting.
Go on.
From a feminist perspective, a radical, she's referred to the radical
feminist.
But once again, this woman, Dworkin, she wrote a book, I forget the name of the book, but I listened to it in audio.
Andrew Dworkin, is it? I can't remember.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead anyway.
She makes some really good points. I mean, talking about the commodification and objectification of women in pornography. And do you know what she says? Now to kind of stick up for the feminists.
Yeah.
She says this. She says that really this is a kind of, I don't want to misquote her, but I think she says.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not gonna.
I think she says.
Don't worry, man. I'm not gonna dismantle.
It's important.
Yeah, go.
There's something going on there. She kind of equates. I'm not gonna say prostitution, but she kind of talks about it being tantamount to some very deep kind of exploitation. And the reason why, if you think about who the ones who actually get most gratification, who it exacerbates the idea of a patriarchy if you believe in it. Pornography exacerbates it. If you look at, for example, women, how women are being treated in pornography. According to Dworkin, she says that most of the positions and stuff like that elevate men into a position of entitlement and decrease women into a position of subordination.
Absolutely false.
You think so?
False. A lot of feminists, you need to realize as well, a lot of feminist doctrines, they do kind of pander to this idea of female victimhood. And a lot of the times when we speak about this...
Now we're talking the same language.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. But when we talk about pornography, right, a study was done, and a lot of people love to say that men objectify women, right? Now, I find that if someone is sympathetic to a human being, they tend to concentrate on the face, because the face is where you can translate a person's emotions the most.
But men don't really do that much.
A study found that men concentrate on the face more than they do the genitals. Where did women focus on?
Don't you tell me.
The genitals. So who's objectifying who? Who's objectifying who? I'll give it to you hopefully later.
Because there's lots of studies.
There's a lot of studies.
But let me give you a few analytics that
that's a very common study. If you look around, you'll find it. And that's the thing. When we talk about this in particular, we talk about it from a standpoint where we've never actually allowed women the right to have the freedom to their own sexuality. So when we're talking about women in particular, I'll give you another study. I'll give you another study.
Go ahead.
There was a study
where. What's the name?
What's that?
What's the study?
Oh, no. But there was a study basically where they showed men in enticing material to measure what they were basically aroused by. They showed men on women, men on men, and animals. And the men were aroused by mostly straight porn. And obviously the gay men were aroused by gay porn. Can you tell me what the women were aroused by?
Lesbian.
Everything.
Really?
Even the animal porn.
Because
when asked later on, what were they aroused by? What did they answer? Nothing. That teaches us about the difference that we've taught women, right? What they can say versus what they actually feel. So when we're talking about women and sexuality, this is another taboo subject, and I think you raised this in the video. It's a very taboo subject that we don't talk about female sexuality, and we don't talk about it in a sense that it's a free conversation for men and women to have. It's in a lot. No, you do. don't pretend all the other guys do. I have guys like that as well. You know, they'll come over and they'll be like, oh, you know, so and so, you know, they gave me, you know, a little bit of oral, right? And I'm like, I'm a liberal, man. I'm like, okay, did you give her oral back? And they're like, no, man, fuck that. Why?
Yeah, well, look,
why?
Let me tell you something.
So this is what I'm trying to say. Like when we talk about this subject, we need to remember that we don't give certain people a fair chance to speak about it. And there's a lot of ingrained cultural and historical reasons for this. Yeah. We want to go back, find out those reasons, and see whether or not they're applicable to today and they're justifiable. Yeah, that's where I think the nuance would be.
I would say that, for example, like if you look at the temperaments of both men and women, in different look, I mean, that's what we have to look at, really and truly. And this is the crux of what I'm trying to say. Men and women are different.
Yeah, they are different.
And they're different in their sexuality even.
Of course.
I'm not saying that women have a lesser sexuality or it's inferior or subordinate or subservient to the man's sexuality. But what I'm saying is completely different. For instance, looking at studies done by Google Analytics, you'll find that majority of porn users are men.
Of course.
Frequent porn users are men. Now, the idea is that I do genuinely believe women are more, and this is going to sound very cliche, very stereotypical, but it's so evident. Are more sentimental, they're more emotional, whether we like it or not. Emotional in what sense? And we have to really caveat this. Emotional in the sense that they are more, they have a higher demand for what you would refer to as affection, love. Whereas a man has a higher tendency to polygamy, I believe.
But this is the thing, this is our problem. When we talk about sexuality, we talk about it as if it's different from affection. sexuality is affection. It's creating bonds between a human being.
But
There are studies to show.
You can have a sexual urge for someone you don't love.
Yeah, of course.
And you can love someone you don't have a sexual urge for.
Of course. But the thing is, we can't deny
but
that.
they're not interchangeable.
No, they're not. But you can't deny the fact that sexuality is very closely linked to the bonding practices and the courting rituals. So when we talk about, sorry, you were just saying, remind me.
Rituals.
Sorry. You were just saying about
men being more addicted to
porn and so on, so whatever.
Yeah.
The difference between men and women is that men have testosterone, a lot more testosterone than women. Yeah. So they have a biological urge to mate and reproduce. That is their thing because it gets their genetics out faster. Yeah. Whereas women can't do that because they carry a child for 9 months. They can't get impregnated any more than that. So that's the biological difference between men and women and why you find more men are porn users than women kind of thing. Because if laws did exist and we just ran anarchy, men would be just running around having sex with everyone.
That's a good point.
But,
that's a good point.
What I'm trying to say is that we have got to this day and age now where this was all post-contraception. After contraception, it's a different talk now because a lot of people now are seeing sex more as a pleasurable thing as opposed to reproduction. Some people have run the mile with that. Some people have stayed in their core. What I'm trying to say is that we now know that there's reasons for different positions. There's reasons for different X, Y, and Z. And these are taboo subjects, even though when you scientifically analyze them, there is nuance as bread and water. You know, so when we talk about, say, like the Kama Sutra, right? The Kama Sutra existed pre-contraception.
I'm not really that familiar.
Don't worry. But it existed before it existed way before contraception and this idea of sexuality and it being a subject. Now, when we talk about the Kama Sutra, we talk about Oriental, right? We talk about Indian, we talk about African. The hieroglyphs, which are 30,000 years old, have depictions.
Now I feel like a real student in the classroom.
But no, seriously, like sexuality is so much older than even some religions. But we've made it so taboo, and we need to look back retrospectively as to why they became taboo, so that we can have a calm talk about why we can or cannot talk about them now. Now, when I see Islam and we talk about haram and stuff like that, I think it's a very noble practice because certain things that are haram are things that can astray you from a productive life. And that is the whole point, and that's the core center of everything. Now, when you take that even on, let's say on a light basis, right, you will see improvements in your life. But if you live that way like a monk, right, which certain people can or can't do, you need to realize that there's certain people out here who...
I totally agree with.
There are certain people out here who are born with deformities. There are certain people out here who are born with certain conditions. That makes the race for them to have a mate a lot harder.
Yes.
So we have certain outlets for people who may not necessarily have the fair resources in order to gain a mate.
No, that's true.
When we talk about things as if they're a haram, when I was saying superstition, I was saying basically the fear to talk about them. And I feel like because of this fear to talk about them, a lot of people seem to view Islam as this very hard religion. And I don't want that for the religion. I know religion is much more complex than that. It's much more multifaceted. And if we gave that kind of not interpretation, but that presentation that we are allowing the conversation, and on top of that, women are working, are in much higher positions now Islamically than men. You're going to see a rise in women who don't know who they want to be with because they've been taught to climb up the ladder, even in cultural Arab places, right?
True.
So the problem is not that we teach them about they're superior to men or they're equal to men, but understanding that now you have diminished the responsibility to get resources from the man, allowing him to live his life and passions and drive.
That's a good point.
Now, when that happens, that's an equal opportunity for men and women to explore their lives, to explore their passions, to explore their even religious beliefs.
That kind of equality sounds excellent.
Precisely. So this is what I'm trying to say. We're in this new era of feminists or women that can work and gain resources. We need not see that as a bad thing. We need not see that as a far liberal thing. We don't even, women working is not a liberal thing. It's just a thing that is naturally progressed as society has gone. 100%. You had African women in all women war military units. So that says to us that women can do easily what men can do. But we must not forget the fundamental factors. Like you say, men and women are different. So if there is a war situation, men are going to be at the front line because of their bigger bone structure, their testosterone, and they're more kind of drawn gravity to fighting behavior. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the women as truth.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to say is I want to build a nuance where we can talk about this stuff. And it doesn't seem like I'm trying to bring you away or bring you astray.
No, I don't think you're doing that. You've given us, I think you've given us all something to think about, man.
Yeah, because like I said, religion for me is one of those things that I want to bring myself to heavily.
Yeah.
So that's why I've taken the Quran, I've taken the Bible, and I've taken the Torah, and it's going to go on from there because knowledge is endless, and knowledge is something that empowers
what
us.
I want you to take as well is my number, because what we need to do sounds like a picture.
I don't know about that. Buy me dinner first. But yeah, no.
If you go through the Quran, anything that you question.
No, seriously, it's just because I think even when you read the Quran, like you said, I think you were talking about like how there are certain traits that are barbaric, and you wouldn't necessarily apply them today, but they're very small. And they're very contextually in that historical sense.
What I was saying was that they were barbaric. If you look at it now, do you know in the Quran it says, don't let in your heart. For example, we're talking about zina. It says, don't let in your hearts there be ra'fa. Ra'fa, for example, there is a.
I love Arabic.
Ra'fa means compassion. For example, the fornicator in Islam, the one who has premarital sex, the fornicator gets in an Islamic state, all these kind of things. According to the Quran, chapter 24, verse 1-2, he gets 100 lashes. And the Quran explicitly says, don't let in your heart be any ra'fa, be any compassion when you're doing fi dinillah in the religion of Allah. Why? Because your aesthetic value judgment doesn't necessitate truth in this.
I understand.
Just because you see something as barbaric, or just because you see something as violent, and it's very, even though the whipping and these things are not understood within the Western context.
I understand, yeah.
Then just because you see it, it doesn't mean it's false, right?
Of course.
So that's the point we're making. So the idea is, these injunctions, these punitive laws, they need to be understood in context.
Yeah.
And no doubt, obviously, if we're talking about adultery and fornication, these things, there's a whole subtopic about it.
Of course.
And the main thing is that it should not be, if someone does it, for example, a Muslim commits fornication, they should not tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
They should conceal their sin. And so they should not be punished even, because they're not telling anyone about it. So that's really where it is.
Yeah.
But that is kind of like a deterrent that's put in place from the Quranic.
That's exactly it. I want to talk about things that are deterrents and not necessarily take away the gravity of them being deterrents by just justifying why they were made. But I want to open up basically the bridge so that people can supposedly talk out, because there are a lot of people who feel like they can't say certain things. Like I was talking to brother, I'm not going to say his name, but brother Mo, and he was basically saying how be careful calling me a liberalist Muslim. And I was saying, well, I wasn't calling you a liberal Muslim, but he's saying even that term is very kind of like
loaded.
Yeah, it's very loaded. And I think it's loaded because you see it from a Western point of view instead of a humanitarian point of view.
Yes.
And I feel like we can come to a middle where, like I said, no validity is taken from the religion, but justifiable and kind of just humanitarian second look at the book is allowed.
That I agree with. So long as someone doesn't label themselves or jeopardize their principles, I'm an advocate for someone being a Muslim, coexisting, being tolerant, and knowing where they stand in society with people that don't agree with the same thing.
It's the same with say pornography, right?
Yeah.
I have no problem with pornography, and I have no problem with pornography actors. Wait. Hear me out. You have to walk in people's shoes before you can. But I watch a lot of interviews and documentaries.
I thought you were gonna say something else.
No. My wife would never let me. 8 years, no way. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, just because I'm okay with pornography, it doesn't mean that I would want it legalized tomorrow. Because I know that we have a generation of very lazy women who want a quick buck and don't really want to work, and that industry would be flooded tomorrow.
I think it's legal already.
Yeah, but the reason there's a stigma to it is to stop that influx and stop people basing all of their traits on their sexuality. This is why it's so important that we draw distinctions between that and connections between that and the hijab. The hijab is supposed to teach a woman that the character and the spirituality is more important than the God-given assets and looks, and that they do not rely on that completely throughout their lives. Otherwise, they will find themselves in problems. But at the same time, you get a lot of women who wear hijab and they're wearing makeup that looks absolutely...
I think me and you agree.
Yeah.
On that note, should we get a drink?
Yes.
I'm thirsty.
No, I've got mine already.
Let me get you another one.
يا لغتي